like it's back to the future for the Biden campaign, no matter what the polls say. Axios is putting it this way. Biden's 2024 vision, play 2020 again. Quote, Biden's decision to run on his past legislative victories rather than make big promises for new policies reflects his top advisor's confidence that the country is heading in the right direction. But a new poll shows voters disagree. Nearly 3/4 of those surveyed say the country is on the wrong track. There are also growing concerns about the president's age, of course. Even the networks are pressing Democrats about that issue. Entry, former senior communications advisor to Senator Chuck Grassley and former senior advisor to the Senate Judiciary Committee, Leslie Marshall, also joining us, Fox News contributor. Gary, you can't blame them. If they go in this direction of the basement strategy, it worked last time. Is this time any different?
Well, I think this time is much different here. Again, when you have Joe Biden's team saying that, they're just going to get out there and sell his agenda. The issue isn't that the American public isn't aware of his agenda. The issue is they actually are very aware of his agenda, and it has harmed the American public. Voters don't approve it. 75% of Americans almost, or 74%, almost 3/4, say the country's heading in the wrong direction. That's been the same over the last 2 years. You can't find a poll over the last 2 years where the public approves of Joe Biden's presidency, his policy, or his handling of any of the major issues here. And so you are seeing him, it's this weird dynamic where they want to say everything's great, but the American public isn't buying that. And they want him to go out there and then sell his agenda. But at the same time, he doesn't have a policy platform on his website. He hides from the press. He hides from voters. He's not doing many events. And I think that is because anytime he is out there, he is very gaffe prone. And that's why you're seeing in this poll, too, which I thought was interesting, is that 43% of Democrats are now questioning Joe Biden's age, stability, ability to do the job long-term, his stamina. And so that's a huge problem just there. You have other figures like 55% of Democrats not even wanting to run again. So that's not even getting to a general election where, again, voters are going to ask themselves in a year from now, were they better off 4 years ago? The question is resoundingly no. Inflation is worse than it was where we are now 3 years ago. The border is worse than it was 3 years ago. Crime is worse than it was 3 years ago. International crises are worse than they were 3 years ago. Gas prices are even still up than they were 3 years ago. So Joe Biden's going to have to get out there and actually do something different here. If he wants to either hide in his basement, I don't think people are going to buy that anymore. He's going to have to get on the campaign trail. And it's going to be tough for him to sell an agenda that people do not like.
Well, you just take one of those issues, like gas prices, you mentioned. This administration's touting the recent drop in prices, but Leslie, that's the recent drop from the highs that we went up to under this presidency. So why the insistence that his policies are working and touting these legislative victories when 74% of the country in this latest NBC poll say that we're going in the wrong direction?
Well, there's a lot to unpack, so I hope I get to do all of that. Okay, so first, you can't look at polls, and the reason you can't look at polls, let's just look at the midterms. You had very similar low approval rating for Joe Biden. You have Republicans saying that I was going to drown as a Democrat in a tsunami. There was going to be a red wave, and that just did not happen. You just can't believe the polls, and I haven't believed the polls, honestly, since 2016, and I don't think most people should. We have a number of outlying polls. We're really far out from the election.
Okay, so your point is that people are happy.
In 2020.
So you disagree that people are not happy?
No, that's not what I'm saying. I say as Americans, honestly, we regardless of facts, it is feelings, right? It is our feelings as voters. But when it comes down to it, whether it's a Democrat or Republican, whether you are happy or unhappy or perceived to be happy or unhappy based on those facts, the overwhelming majority of us on the left vote for our Democratic candidate, on the right vote for the Republican candidate, which is why those independent voters, especially in those swing states, that's what it comes down to. It's really like 5 areas in this nation that end up deciding, especially the general election, and have for the past few election cycles.
I still don't know where you're going with
2020,
this. So what are the legislative victories that they can run on?
There are many. And the legislative victories, I would disagree with Garrett,
we'll
are
take
not only victories for the nation and the American people, they are what voters wanted.
Whether you look at legislative victories
when it comes to prescription drug prices, infrastructure, the economy, child poverty, I could go on. I could list 24, but we don't have time.
All right. That is true. Time is an issue. So let's put this up on the screen. Former President Trump does remain President Biden's top Republican challenger heading into 2024. In the latest polls, Leslie, in fact, his lead has only grown since his historic federal indictment in the classified documents case. A new poll finds him at 51%, up 5 points since April, and nearly 30 points ahead of his nearest competitor, which is, of course, Florida Governor Ron DeSantis, from whom we just heard. The GOP field has now grown to a dozen candidates. Many analysts say that will only help President Trump. But one of those candidates does not see it that way. Listen, competition is always great, Garrett. So is a bigger field better or worse for the leading candidate, which is former President Donald Trump right now?
So I think if this is a question of Donald Trump being at 28%, the next closest person being at 17%, I would say it is. But we've seen over and over again the last 3 or 4 months that Donald Trump is eating up 50, 60% of the vote. You know, folks thought when Florida Governor Ron DeSantis would get in that would change it. He's remained pretty stagnant and really a non-factor against Donald Trump. He continues to suck up all the oxygen in the room. He is the gravitational force. He's the kingmaker and king of the Republican Party right now until proven otherwise. And really that's been the case since he almost walked down the escalator in 2015. And so, you know, even if there's this one-on-one matchup here, we've seen head-to-head here, if you're having 50, 60% of the vote, it's going to be very tough to beat him.
Okay.
The attacks just continue to help him, and I think voters trust him in the Republican primary to take on Joe Biden as well, so I don't think the field necessarily matters.
All right, and that same poll shows, Leslie, President Biden beating former President Trump 49% to 45% in a hypothetical general election showdown. Biden's 4-point lead is within the poll's margin of error, we should note. It also shows Biden and Florida Governor Ron DeSantis tying at 47% each. I know you're not buying the polls, Leslie, but perhaps you could weigh in with your reaction.
Oh, yeah. I mean, what these polls show, you can always look at numbers and extrapolate something from it. And what we extrapolate is we're just a very divided nation, almost 50-50, which speaks, to what I said earlier, which is you have Republican voters, you have Democratic voters, and you have that little sliver in between, and that is within that margin of error, and that is what decides the general election. I would agree with what Garrett said. I would agree that Donald Trump is still the king of the Republican Party. I would also say that he will be, I've said this before, he will be the GOP nominee. But I will also say, as I've said before, that Joe Biden will be victorious over him. And the reason for that is it's not even just about policies. A lot of my Republican friends that voted for him once or twice, Donald Trump that is, don't want to go back to some of the shenanigans and want some of the decorum they feel that has been brought back to the White House and the presidency.
I appreciate the discussion, a spirited one that was. Thank you so much, Garrett, Leslie. Great to see both of you.
Thanks, Sandra.
Thank you.